Right, well, hello everybody, and it's really exciting to see so many people in the room. I think this is the biggest attendance by a considerable way that we've had since we restarted having virtual meetings, so that's very exciting for us, and we know a number of you are very, very new to One Place Studies too. I think you're going to find this really enjoyable and very informative and useful, whether you've been at this for 5 minutes or 50 years. So I'm going to hand over to Steve, who is now going to tell us about his own particular One Place study. And it's all yours, Steve, if you would like to share your screen. And I will mute everybody, and then I will have to unmute you, Steve. So just give me a chance to, you can probably unmute yourself, in fact. Hang on, Steve, don't say anything yet. I'll have to, it's saying, that's it.
That's
it. Yeah, yep. We can see your screen and we can hear you. So
brilliant.
Away you go.
Okay, so hello everybody. Steve Jackson, who's been doing the Waters Upton One Place 7 on and off since around 2012, I think, which makes it sound like I've been doing it forever, but not really. I'm still a relative newbie to the actual study part of it, as we'll see. So we'll get the jokes out of the way with first. Are you looking for a One Place study with an edge? A One Place study with a superhero? Then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Waters Upton. None of those photos are mine, I have to say. Waters Upton is a small village in the county of Shropshire in England, but Shropshire borders Wales. It's in between Wales and what's now the West Midlands conurbation, just to give you a kind of geographical idea of where we are and where we're wandering this evening. And this is what I'm going to try and cover. It's not one long continuous subject. There's about 4 things, and I don't know whether that's going to be a success or disaster. We're going to find out. So the One Place study itself, how it started and what's happened since. Farm work, non-census sources for agriculture and employment in my place, it being a rural village and parish. Agriculture and employment are very much intertwined. So looking at beyond the obvious census, some of the things that I found, which may be helpful to those of you doing similar One Place studies. A subject that I know a few of you have expressed interest in finding out more about, as I've mentioned it a few times on Twitter, is the Waters Upton family forest, not tree, at Ancestry. So I'll be going into that, and then very briefly at the end, where I want to wander next, plans for the future. So where it all began, it began in the churchyard at Waters Upton in September 2011. I spent a week in Shrewsbury so that I could be down at the archives every day. And one evening, having found out that my great-great-great-grandmother, Mary Ashley, as she was at the time when she gave birth to my great-great-grandfather, Henry, she was buried there as Mary Titley, wife of John Titley, at Waters Upton, so I wanted to go and see and photograph the grave. And having done that, there I was on a reasonable autumn evening in a churchyard, not a very big one. It's not a very big village, so it's not a very big churchyard. Time on my hands, so I put those together, and yeah, I thought, let's photograph as many of the other monumental inscriptions as I can, and then put them onto Find a Grave. So that's how it all began, really, as kind of interest in. I'd benefited a lot in my genealogy and family history and one name study from volunteers around the world who've done things like putting photographs on places like Find a Grave or transcriptions. So a very small way of giving something back. And of course, me being me, I put the photos up, transcribed the inscriptions, and then thought, the stories behind these inscriptions, let's do a little bit more research. For example, here a very sad stone, 3 children aged between 14 months and 5 years, who all died in October and November 1863. Not expecting you to read all that, but basically I researched them. I found the family at Waters Upton in 1861, but then I couldn't find them afterwards. Where did they go? Turned out there was a family tree on Ancestry which had the parents, John and Elizabeth Morgan, living in Geneva in Ohio in America. And there they were on the 1880 census, with the 3 children born in Ohio, starting very soon after they got there, probably about 1864. And I was able to get in touch with the owner of that tree and let him know about other people to add to that tree that he'd never previously known about. So after that, with some encouragement from Martin, who had set up what was then the Register of One Place Studies, I formally started a one place study based on the churchyard, and then went that bit further and thought, well, let's not stop at the gravestones, let's expand it to the whole village and parish, and transcribe some records and put them online. So it was an extension of what I was doing at Find a Grave, really, gathering information that might be useful to people with ancestors in the village of Waters Upton and sharing it online for them to find and use. So I didn't keep pictures of the website in its early days. I've actually robbed the Wayback Machine at archive.org to get a picture of how it looked about 2015, when I put several categories of information on there. And also in 2015, November 2nd, the very first blog post, I started to pull some of that data together, and it was about the Reverend John Thomas Hulk, curate of Waters Upton, and he was responsible for getting the parish church that we see in the village today built to replace the old one. But then, yeah, tumbleweed. Not only that, but tumbleweed that wasn't really rolling anywhere either. And the reason for that, the shameless adaptation of somebody else's photograph, other commitments, the one name study, I was working full time, and the one place study didn't really get much of a look in for quite a while. But then, about 4 years later, very early retirement beckoned. And with that extra time that I knew was coming up, I joined the Society for One Place Studies. Very early retirement happened. I attended the Society's AGM about this time last year in November. There was a plea for new committee members to keep the organisation going, and I answered that on the basis that I could make a difference. And having done so, I thought, you know, I really ought to actually start doing one place study stuff again. So Waters Upton One Place Study was revived, lots more stuff being put onto the website, more records, and beginning to analyse some of those records. A lot of the stuff that you see, the charts and things on the screen there, they are from analyses of the 1841 census, looking at occupations, looking at where the people had come from, where they'd immigrated into Waters Upton from, kinship, how the people were related to each other. Surprising number of people had links by blood or marriage, and you can see them in that little portion of a chart on the right hand side of the screen. All the people coloured in blue were alive on the 1841 census, and they were all one way or another connected to each other. And you can see the population figures there taken mainly from the censuses, which show that 1841, that was actually the highest population of the parish. So it's fluctuated since then, but it's never really grown. The website as it looks now, with a One Place Study Society emblem on there, and a few more links on the menu. So things that I've put on there, they're not all complete by any means, but parish registers and other sources of information to supplement them, because I can't get to all the parish registers. The marriage register is still in the parish, I'm given to understand, because there aren't many marriages going on there, so it's still in use. No burials available after 1815. Censuses, obviously, and not just putting on abstracts from the censuses, but also where I've seen that there are people who are present in the village from one census to the next, putting in links so that you can trace them from one census to the next. So you can see there, for example, a little extract from the 1861, Thomas Titley, that bloke on the gravestone. He was also there in 1851, so you can click on that. His wife, Elizabeth, actually no, he's the son of that Titley on the gravestone. His wife Elizabeth was also there in 1871. You can jump to her record and so on. Crime, a whole page full of newspaper reports relating to crime. Makes Waters Upton sound like a bit of a hotbed of criminality, but trust me, most of it was things like drunkenness, so it's really not that bad, although there was a murder. Wills and probate, certainly far from complete there, got a lot more to do. Military details of the people that I found who were living in or are connected to Waters Upton, who fought or fell in World War I, maps of various kinds, and links to other sources of Shropshire family history and local history that are online. Electoral registers, a fair chunk of them done, but I really want to get a lot more of those on to help with tracing what was happening to at least some of the people in between censuses and beyond 1911. Directories, I really want again to see the real things in Shropshire Archives at some point, but in the meantime it's surprising how many you can find online, either at Ancestry or the wonderful Leicester historical directory site, and even a few on Google Books. In other news is, I think, the newest page, and that's basically newspaper reports and notices and such like that I just can't fit anywhere else. Everything from a tremendous downpour of rain to a Waters Upton chap who claimed a miracle cure from quack medicine. And land, that's mainly newspapers, again, reports or notices of sales by auction mainly of land and property, which leads us into the next part quite nicely, with a little bit there from 1777, mentioning a farm in Waters Upton with arable pasture and meadowland, rights of access to the wild moor. Yes, there were wild moors back then, not anymore. So, part 2, non-census sources for agriculture and employment. These are the ones that I found relating to my place. You may find similar things for your One Place studies. Some of them won't apply, and this isn't comprehensive, but it is just to give a kind of overview of some of the things that I've been able to find too, as well as the obvious source of the census. Tell me more about agriculture in the parish of Waters Upton and employment. And I've linked the two together because of it being the rural parish that it is. Farming, agriculture is the basis pretty much for everything else, or certainly was. So obviously you get farmers, agricultural labourers and other farm workers. They are there working away, so there's butchers that can take advantage of that and ply their trade, blacksmiths and wheelwrights to keep the transport going, shoe the horses and make the wheels for the wagons and the carts. Bricklayers, carpenters and painters when there's building going on, the rector to tend to the flock, teachers to teach the children, tailor, dressmakers, shoemakers, making sure that people have got their clothes and their shoes in good repair, innkeepers, 2 pubs in the village, and they are on a road that runs past the village, a toll road that goes from Wellington through to other towns in the northern part of Shropshire, Turnpike Road rather than Toll Road, I should say. So they were there to take advantage as much as anything else of the passing trade, as well as supplying the needs of the villagers and the people doing all this hard work on the land or whatever. And of course, servants. The farmers had their servants, butchers had servants, the blacksmiths and wheelwrights had them, and all of those people together, all kind of interdependent on each other, but it's all based on the farming that the majority of the parish is there as the basis of. So things that you can find out more about agriculture and employment, maps, and not just the standard ones. This is something that I found on the National Library of Scotland maps website, a types of farming map from 1944. Very helpfully, Waters Upton isn't actually shown on the map, but I put a little red circle there to indicate where it is, and it just falls within the mixed farming with a substantial dairying side, just on the border of that kind of bluey green area that Shrewsbury sits in, which is a lot more devoted to dairying. Tithe apportionments, the tithe maps, those of you that have the good fortune to have them and access them for your one place studies, great sorts of information from just before the 1841 census for many reasons. But if you take all of that information, put it into a spreadsheet, as I did, you can then start playing with the numbers, and that's what produced the pie chart down in the bottom right of the screen. And from that you can see that more than 2/3 of the land in the parish of Waters Upton was devoted to arable farming, more than 1/4 of it to pasture or meadow, and less than 5%, no hang on, let's get that right, exactly 5% on other types of land use, for example the houses. A mixed bag on this slide, books, directories, quarter sessions. A number of counties had books published at the turn of the previous century, or the one before that actually, on the general view of agriculture. And there's one for Shropshire, and that gives us an idea of the character of the soil and the farming in the area that Waters Upton sits. A turnip soil, which basically means that it was good for the 4 crop rotation system of agriculture that came in and became so popular and helped fuel the agricultural revolution. It's not particularly, it's not completely flat, but it's relatively flat, particularly compared with other parts, particularly the south of Shropshire. And the soil described as a sandy loam. Directories, another fairly obvious source for employment, but some of them will give you details of the character of the parish, including the land and the agriculture. And so Kelly's directories from 1891, probably before, right through to 1934 and probably beyond, describing the soil and the chief crops being wheat, barley and turnips. I mentioned quarter sessions records. These are the quarter sessions of the peace that were held in the counties each quarter, surprisingly. In a previous online meeting that we had as a potential source of information about employment in one place studies, and I have actually just today had a look at a database that the Shropshire Family History Society produced from the quarter session records that are held at the archives in Shrewsbury. Nearly 500 entries on there where people gave their location as Waters Upton from 1832 through to 1919, and you can see there something of the variety of employment that was recorded for the people. Not everybody had their job recorded. A lot of the people that are listed were there as jurors, and that's all that's said about them. An awful lot of police constables, police officers, policeman. The term there is depending on who was making the record. But beyond that, a beer retailer, a brass founder seems a bit odd for a little rural village, but that was a chap who was actually doing his business in Birmingham, but had his country retreat, if you like, at Waters Upton Hall. And the others are kind of the usual suspects, perhaps, mostly, although the wool merchant is a bit of an outlier. And a surgeon, we're not really talking about a village doctor because back in the 1800s you didn't have that, but a surgeon did live there, dealing with a clientele there and in surrounding villages. Newspapers, again, I mentioned crime earlier on, I mentioned a murder. Quite often reports of crimes and cases that were up before the courts, they also mention the occupations of the people involved. So in the murder, for example, we find out that there was a publican called John Gower at Waters Upton in 1785. Not for very long, though, after the murder of the gloriously named Octavius Hitchcock. He did run out after that, and I'm not sure they ever found him. But no doubt he was very soon replaced and kept the beer flowing. Theft in 1843. There we have Robert Blanton, a butcher of Waters Upton. He wasn't on the 1841 census, he wasn't on the 1851, but clearly in between, there he was at Waters Upton working as a butcher. And in fact, later on, he did return to the village after several years in Staffordshire. 1859, drunk and incapable. Thomas Cartwright, drunk and incapable while driving a wagon from Wellington to Waters Upton. Pretty sure he was the Thomas Cartwright that was on the 1861 census at Waters Upton, where he was described as an agricultural labourer. So it goes to show that these labourers could also be doing work like being a wagoner when the needs arose. And finally, cruelty to a horse, a sad case, and it involved a farmer at Waters Upton. So just 4 examples there that I've ripped from the website of finding employment records, if you like, in the papers that can supplement the other sources. Going back further in time, once we get before the glorious age of civil registration and censuses and those quarter sessions that started from 1832, things get a bit more sparse in terms of sources of occupations. But of course, we've got the good old parish registers. Waters Upton were not early adopters. It was 1815 before they started the new style parish register, in which it became the default to record the occupation of the father or the mother, if perhaps if she had one and she was had a child out of wedlock. And it's clearly not going to give you the full picture because it is only the people that were having children in the parish and getting them baptised there. But all the same, a good selection there of the kind of employment occupations that we would expect in the parish. and one that I was quite surprised at the end of the list there, a machine maker. I have no idea what machine he was making. He was only there for one baptism before he disappeared again, and that's on the to-do list to try and track him down. Hopefully later on he's still about, and maybe I can get some idea of what sort of machine he was making and why he would be doing that in Waters Upton. Also early 1800s newspapers again, and I found very interesting the notices of sale by auction of the farming stock and the implements of husbandry when farmers decide to leave the business, or perhaps after they've died and it's sold off under the terms of the will. So you get a real insight. We know, for example, yeah, he's a farmer. So what did he actually do? What animals did he have? What tools was he using? These will give you a good idea. And the numbers that were involved. So we see details of the cows and the horses and the pigs and the sheep. They tended to have something of everything pretty much. Details of the we see the term implements of husbandry on wills quite often without much more in the way of detail. These notices can go, particularly this one, I've taken out the bit about the stock and just included here the stuff about the implements, because wow, what a list, what a load of stuff. Wagons, harvest gearing, tumbrels, in other words, the muck wagons, ploughs and harrows, of course, land rollers, winnowing machines, scales and weights, rakes, wagon ropes, sieves, riddles, pikels, rakes, mattocks, spades, charavals, which confused the heck out of me when I saw it, and did some searching and found it was a Shropshire term for a dung hook. Obviously an essential piece of equipment to keep the fertilizer where it should be. Going back another 100 years into the early 1700s, and the only reason it's only the early 1700s here is because I've only so far transcribed wills and inventories from 1700 to 1730. We don't tend to see the inventories so much later in the 1700s, but if you can get to see them, again, it's very much like the kind of information that we've just seen in the newspaper notices of the auctions. Exactly what livestock they had, the values that were placed on them for the purposes of selling them under the terms of the will, and again the implements. And there's a yeoman in 1729. We saw earlier the mention of the chief crops, which were fairly limited: wheat, barley and turnips. But John Hughes here had got rye and wheat, barley, peas, fitches, oats, French wheat as it was called, hay and clover, beans, before he'd got his livestock listed there. So a fair old variety of crops, in fact, back in the early 1700s. He'd also got a press and a cheese press. So a lot of the farmers that had the dairy cattle were making cheese on the farm. And finally, William Hazeldine, he was listed as a millwright, but okay, that's another occupation, but there's also a bit of a side element perhaps of agriculture there, as he'd got a cow and a colt, corn in the barn, hay, cheese in the house, and his cheese press for making it. And we don't just have his list of things in inventory, we have a list of debts that were owing by him, which also gives you an idea of his connections with other people in the parish and perhaps surrounding hamlets, and the kind of agricultural activities he was involved in. So he owed money to people for summering his colt, a load of hay, for shoes. I haven't quite worked out whether that was for him or for his horses at this point, for ploughing and for grass. And going back another 100 years into the early 1600s, and we're back to the parish registers again. I'm sure there's other sources, but so far in the early 1600s, probably if I look at wills, I'll find out more, but I'm mainly going to be relying on looking at the parish registers. And there it's probably going to be fairly intermittent to see occupations recorded. But from 1598, the first occupation was listed. The word husbandman was added to 2 baptismal entries, and we get a weaver, a labourer, and a yeoman, and a smith. So mostly the usual suspects again. But we do get a vintner from London in the village at some point, and a whitesmith and a wood collier, as well as a joiner and a miller. So a lot of different sources that you can tap for information on the occupations that are going on in your place, and the agriculture that, if it's a rural area, may underpin most of those occupations. So the famed, or maybe not, perhaps the infamous Upton family forest at Ancestry. In the overview there, you can see what I've said about it. On Ancestry, not a single tree, a collection of trees, hence it's probably better to call it a forest. For past residents of the historic parish, the modern day parish is larger, of Upton, very much a work in progress. And those of you that are familiar with Ancestry are probably asking, why? Why on earth would you do that? Why would you use Ancestry to try and create this kind of thing for a one-place study? And there's all kinds of reasons why you probably wouldn't. Like most family tree software, it's not designed for a single family tree. It's designed for a single family tree, not multiple trees and unconnected individuals all in one. It would normally be a tree. So there's no overview or easy way in, as I called it there. With your own family tree on Ancestry, if you've got one, you can get a nice pedigree view and follow the generations back. Here, no such luck, because there are loads of pedigrees in there. A lot of them do end up connecting, but it's not easy to get an overview of what's going on. If you want to search through it, you're limited to searching by people's names. You can't search by place, for example. There's no analytical tools to try and, how many blacksmiths were there at any given point in time, or between 2 different dates, that kind of thing. It's not easy to share widely with other people. Yes, you can search Ancestry trees, of course. If it's a public tree, as my one is, anybody else on Ancestry that's a current subscriber can look at it. People can email, and I can send them an Ancestry invite to give them access, but it's not a kind of default, oh yeah, if you want to look at it, just pop over to Ancestry and you'll see it, no trouble. And then the other things that Ancestry is well renowned for, those Ancestry hints, oh no, back, and those member trees, which have a great reputation, as in, do not copy what's in those Ancestry trees, because there's so many errors in them. And a number of people maintain that the transcriptions at Ancestry aren't as good as those at Find My Past, for example, which also has a family tree system. But Ancestry is kind of what I've got used to over the years that I've been doing family history. And yeah, okay, more problems. A few kind of more specific to Shropshire here. The lovely thing on the 1911 census where, oh, there's lots of people here that didn't write Shropshire down as the county of birth. So we'll add that automatically, except that they spelt it wrong. And we mentioned before we went live, Wellington Registration District in Shropshire. There is also a Wellington Registration District in Somerset. And the poor people at Ancestry that were indexing these couldn't tell the difference quite often. So you see an example there of William H. Corbett with an event registered at Wellington in Somerset. Not if the volume number is 6A, it wasn't, that was Shropshire. And guess what registration district Waters Upton's in? Yep, it's in Wellington. So imagine the fun. And it gets better because you have a similar situation with Newport, which there's another Newport registration district, and Whitchurch, which they quite often spell as Whitechurch. And then another thing there is Shropshire Parish registers, which are really so helpful for doing this research. They're at Find My Past. So we might well come back to that question, why? Well, you can get around some of the issues that I've mentioned, and some of the issues aren't as bad as we might at first think. You can make use of the suffix field on the name to help with searching. I've used it to put OPS in square brackets next to everybody that's got some presence within the parish at some point, so that I can find them. My tree tags are a relatively recent introduction, which give you additional options. We'll have a look at them shortly. Hints, yeah, terrible reputation. They are quite often relating to records that are for people with a very similar name to the person you happen to be working on in somebody else's tree, but not the same person. But quite often I found they are for the right person. And I've actually found if you apply a bit of common sense, yeah, right, he's not going to have been in an electoral role at the age of 2. We can dismiss that. There's a record there for this lady, and it's under her married name when she was 5. So no, we can dismiss that. If you use your good genealogical sense when you're looking at the hints, you can winnow the wheat from the chaff, and you can actually find some very useful records there, and it can speed things up for you. Member trees, again, like hints, bad reputation. They are a mixed bag. There are some truly awful things in them, like people who appear on censuses after they've died, women having children when they are 2 years old. In one case, I found a man who was his own father or his own son. Depends which way you look at it. But you can find perfectly good information, and particularly I find that's where the person who's building the tree is putting on information about their own immediate ancestors. Quite often that tends to be good solid information, and bonus points, you can often find photos with them and copies of BMD certificates that they've scanned and uploaded as well. So those 83 photos that are attached onto the Waters Upton tree or forest there, they are all pictures of people and certificates and such like that other members or subscribers to Ancestry have put up. And at the end of the day, it's Ancestry. It's been going for a very long time, certainly since before I was doing family history. There are so many records, and the green arrow there is pointing to, as it stands at the moment, over 12,000 records that I've attached to the 2,700 people in that tree. So it's got some things going for it. The My Tree tags I mentioned as a way of potentially helping with sorting and finding things that you're interested in. So not all of these tags I use. I put green asterisks next to the standard ones that Ancestry supplies by default as ones that I do tend to use fairly frequently. The military service one is quite handy. Died young, multiple spouses, never married, no children. Orphan doesn't come up that often. Adoptions, I've seen a couple of examples of. Research status tags I don't tend to use very much, except for I've put the mark next to unverified. I should have put it next to hypothesis, and that tends to be where I think I found the spouse of somebody from the one place study. But it is a bit of a kind of, this is a best guess thing. Don't take this as gospel. It's a hypothesis at the moment that this woman in these records actually did marry this bloke, or vice versa. And then the things that make it much more useful are the custom tags. And there's a smallish selection there of some of the custom tags I've made and use. I use it to tag up occupations, always with the word OPS in front of it to indicate that it's somebody in the one place study who had that occupation. So there's just a few of them there. You can highlight things like record sets that they were in, a particular census, or the burial register, baptism register, the fact that they were born in the parish, the 1939 register. In a few cases, the people that I'm not researching further, because perhaps they're siblings of people who lived in Waters Upton, they are in the tree for completeness, but I'm not going to do very much more research of them, putting them on the tree, because they don't have much of a connection with the parish. So that's to highlight to me and anybody that's looking at the tree that no, it doesn't end because I'm stuck. That person ends there because I'm not researching them any further. And there's a name change up there, which I've used occasionally. So a little bit more background on those tree tags. You can, in my experience anyway, I might be proven wrong about this, but you can create as many as you like. But when it comes to adding them onto people in your tree, when you come to select them and click them so that they appear underneath the name and the birth and death dates, you can only see the first 80 that you've created. So you could have 120, but any that you make after number 81, you're not actually going to be able to use. So there's not much point. So choose your tags well. And certainly I haven't finished working out what all the tags I'm doing and using are going to be. There's going to be a little bit of tag revision going on at some point. And clearly, given that you've got that limit, tags that you're not going to use that often aren't worth creating. So my name change one, for example, that we saw on the previous slide, I've perhaps only used that once or twice for people who have been born with one name and ended up with another, other than through marriage. And my solution to those little oddities that you want to kind of keep track of is to use a C notes tag and then put something in the notes field that Ancestry provides, so that you can find the people who've got C notes and have a look and see why it is you flag them up as being of interest. When you come to make these tags, it's letters and numbers only. There's no punctuation. Maximum of 25 characters, which I have kind of found a bit of a bind sometimes. And I think it's a good thing if your tree is available for other people to see because it's public or you've shared it with people, those other people can see your tags. So they can see what you've flagged up. And if you want to use those tags, this is to actually find people. This is how it works. You click on the tree search button towards the top left of your profile screen. That brings up tree search. If you're not using filters, you start typing a name in there, a first name or a surname. But we're going to click on filters. That's highlighted in the brown box there. And you can filter by your tree tags. And you can use the standard tags that Ancestry provides. But for this example, we're going to use a custom tag. So click on that to see all the ones available. Follow the brown arrow back across the screen, and there's a small selection there of them. We're going to go for the 1901 census, the people that were in the one place study in 1901. That's the only one I'm going to use, so click done. And the tree search thing, then underneath you can start seeing the names of the people who have been tagged with the OPS census 1901 tag. It's not overly brilliant. The names are presented, I suspect, in the order in which you added the tags, not in alphabetical order. But here's something that can make it more useful. You can then start putting a name in addition to using the tag, and you can combine more than one tag. So you could, for example, filter it by the census of 1901 and agricultural labourer, and that will bring you at that subset of the population. Even with all of that, clearly using an ancestry tree for a one-place study is not ideal, and I'm not intending this one to be this is the place for you to come, people, to find out everything about my one-place study. I'm using it partly because of my familiarity with using ancestry trees for my own research, for quick and dirty DNA trees, as they're known. So I'm going to create this family forest for Waters Upton, containing as many past residents of the parish as I can find, discover the connections between them, and make sure that they are visible by adding people that link the different families. Find as many of the records that are on Ancestry as possible and link the records with the people. Plus, if I've got parish records for Shropshire from another website, I will type the details in for them on this. And the end result of that is that I should be able to download a GEDCOM file from Ancestry, and then I can actually start doing something with it. I can upload it to an offline tree program, and I'm also looking forward to putting it into Name and Place, something that we'll be hearing more about from Pam next year at one of these meetings, and then hopefully share the GEDCOM and the information in it online, perhaps through a self-hosted next generation generated tree on my website, or maybe through Wikitree, or even through more than one way to get that information out there into the public domain for people to find, and to kind of tie it in with the records that are on the website. So, he said, checking the time. That's about right. I think this won't take much longer, and we've got some time for a bit of discussion. What next? That seemed a really appropriate kind of crystal ball picture that I found there with trees, but I've realised the trees in the crystal ball kind of look dead. Okay, it's through the winter, but clearly I'm not hoping my future is that the Waters Upton tree dies. One thing that I'm hoping to do is get a lot more records transcribed for the website and for my use in analysing what's been going on in Waters Upton. So there's wills, military records, post-1815 burial records. Family Search have got those on microfilm and on digital microfilm, but you can only see them in family history centres. And of course, as you know, we can't get into them at the moment, so that's pending. The 1941 National Farm Survey documents, I'm very keen to look at those, but they're at the National Archives down at Kew, and chances of me getting in there seem to be quite remote at the moment. And a lot of records at Shropshire Archives, many but not all of which are listed on that graphic on the slide there, a whole range of things which will push the study back in time and increase the breadth and the depth of knowledge about the people that were in the parish. Again, that's dependent on restrictions not being quite as tough as they are now, so that a visit to the archives becomes feasible for me. Carrying on work with the Ancestry Forest, actually going to Waters Upton again. I've only had that one visit so far to take more photos. For example, I discovered only later, having taken all those pictures in the churchyard, that there is an overflow cemetery not that far away, so there's graves for me to photograph there. and much more analysis of the information that I've got on a wide range of themes and how they impact each other, and pulling it all together, synthesis and publication, stories of the families and the individuals, hopefully tying into some of these themes that I'm going to analyse, articles on the analysis, house histories I'm hoping too, starting with the very easy ones like the inns and the rectory and the hall, where it will be quite easy to trace successive occupants and engagement. A number of people doing online studies are getting great results from Facebook pages or groups for their place, with lots of engagement and people chipping in information and photos. And maybe more of this sort of thing, talks and presentations. So thank you very much for listening to me. If you're on Twitter, hope you'll join in with One Place Wednesday hashtag party tomorrow, discussing one place studies of your own and in general. And with any luck, I will get myself back to the correct screen. How do I get rid of this now? Stop share.
I'll say I can do it for you if you can't.
There we go.
I'm going to stop the recording before we have the questions, because that will give us a bit more freedom to say what we want to say, and people can bring themselves back. But I'd just like to say thank you very much before I do that. That was really good, Steve, and an excellent introduction to your One Place, and giving us all so many ideas that we're never going to have time to follow up.
Well, that's it. There's a